My favorite quote from Mr. Ford is the one I shared with you way back in Lesson 5. One of the greatest discoveries a man makes, one of his great surprises, is to find he can do what he was afraid he couldn't do. Don't let the steps of the Superior and Transgo kits intimidate you. I think by simply watching the classroom videos, even though the information is challenging and new, your mind is cleverly processing and storing it so you'll be familiar and comfortable actually doing the steps later. You can do it. This is Ford E4OD for our 100 class, Lesson 15. In the last lesson, we installed the selector shaft and parking rod assembly, check balls, separator plate, and gaskets, along with the accumulator body and a new solenoid pack. In this lesson, we'll take apart, clean, and modify the main valve body, as well as install the bolts and nuts which fasten all the valve body area assemblies. Let's get back to work. Get the valve body from the parts bench and take it to another area. Before we begin, keep in mind if you are not installing the Transgo HD2 kit, no modifications are made to this assembly. You simply need to clean it and make sure all valves move freely. We are installing it during this project, therefore, there are a total of 6 modifications we need to make to the valve body by following pages 1 and 2 of the Transgo instructions. You begin by determining if you have an early Type 1 valve body or a later Type 2 version of the valve body. Compare this area of the casting with the 2 enlarged pictures of the boxed area in the instructions. As you can see, our demo valve body is obviously a Type 2. Identification is necessary because parts and modifications are not the same for both types on all of the steps. Take step 1 for example. Since we are working with a Type 2, we will have to drill a hole here. If you are working with a Type 1 version, you won't drill one. Let's get started. In order to perform step 1 and drill this hole, the parts in this bore of the casting must be removed. Note step 3 describes replacing 4 original parts with new ones from the kit during reassembly. We'll install a new white spring, a new quick fill valve, a new yellow spring, and a new spacer. Remove this retainer. Push in on it with a finger and work it upward. Keep your finger over the end of the bore to keep a spring from flying out as you finish removing the retainer with your other hand. Remove the spring. Tap the casting with a wooden block. A piston will come to the end of the bore. Work the piston out. Use a pick and work this retainer upward. Pull it out. Tilt the casting and bump it with your palm. The quick fill valve and spring will fall out. Drilling the hole is next. In order to minimize metal particles around these parts, I'll take the valve body to another area. I'll place a small piece of wood under this side of the casting in order to keep it level. According to the instructions, use a 110 thousandths of an inch bit and drill through this area. Do not drill through the other side of the bore. Again, drill through this casting wall only. Don't drill through the other wall of the bore. Clean the casting in mineral spirits and blow it dry. Only 2 of the original parts from this bore will be reused. This piston and this flat retainer. Clean them with mineral spirits. Set them like so. Let's get the new components from the kit. We'll need the white spring, new quick fill valve, yellow spring, spacer, along with the new end plug and clip. Everything we need is in this one bag. Lay the new parts out. This orange colored spring will be used later in step 2. Put assembly lube onto the white spring and insert it into the end of the quick fill valve. Put fluid onto it. Work them into the bore. Insert a flat blade screwdriver, push in on the valve, and replace this retainer. Put fluid onto the piston and push it into the bore. Put the spacer inside of the yellow spring and insert them. Put fluid onto the new end plug and push it in. Install the new clip. This completes steps 1, 3, and 4 on page 1. Step 2 is to replace the original spring on the end of the solenoid regulator valve with the orange color one from the kit. Work this retainer upward partially with a pick or screwdriver. Place a finger over the end of the bore in order to prevent the spring from flying out. Remove the spring. Extract the valve with pliers. It's a good idea to once again clean the casting along with the valve and retainer in mineral spirits. Blow them dry and return them here. Put a few drops of fluid onto the solenoid regulator valve and insert it into the bore. Insert the new orange spring. Use a flathead screwdriver to compress the spring as you insert the retainer. This completes the steps on page 1. The final 2 steps of installing the Transgo kit are on page 2. Step 1 is to replace components in this bore. If you are working on a Type 1 valve body, you should simply remove this retainer, install a new red spring in place of the original one, and replace the retainer. Since our demo transmission has a Type 2 valve body, we'll need to install a new bushing, new valve, and a new white spring. Here they are. Pick these spool valves. They should snap back freely. If they feel sticky or are stuck, you'll need to work them out with a pick and clean them as well as the entire bore. These are free. Pry out this retaining clip. Turn the valve body over. Insert a pick or small screwdriver into this opening and push the bushing outward. Turn the casting back over. Pull the bushing, inner valve, and spring out. The end with the small tip goes in first. Put fluid onto the bushing. Push it into the bore and replace the clip. Step 2 on page 2 explains how to insert a small plug into a hole in the casting on type 2 valve bodies if this hole is present. This is an incredibly small plug. If you'll recall, it is still in the small bag which had the orifice and 1/4-inch ball we used in lesson 14. Let's check our valve body and look for the hole. Turn the casting over. There is no hole in this area of our demo valve body, therefore I will not need to install it. The remaining information on page 2 is to help you correctly reinstall check balls between the lower control body and the main casting after disassembly for cleaning. Use an 8mm socket and ratchet to remove the 2 bolts which fasten the lower control body to the main valve body. Lift the lower control body up, turn it over, and set it like this. Check to make sure the 1 to 2 manual transmission valve, located here, can move freely. This one feels good. This is the engagement control valve. It moves fine too. If either one feels sticky or is stuck, remove the end retainers spring, and valves, clean everything in mineral spirits, and reassemble. Remove the separator plate. Note there are two 5/16 of an inch check balls here and here. Remove and set them aside. There are two smaller 1/4 inch check balls here and here. Remove them too. For the last time, clean all of these parts and castings individually and return them here. We're almost finished with the valve body. The check balls go back in first, but let's assume we've forgotten where they go. If we were working with an earlier Type 1 casting, there are only two 5/16 of an inch balls which go here and here. Our valve body is a Type 2, so two 5/16 balls go here and here. Let's install them. Get the two larger 5/16 of an inch diameter balls. Place one here and one here. According to this diagram, two 1/4 inch balls will always go here and here. If the plate has two holes here, then a third 1/4 inch ball will go here. Since we know balls must go here and here, I'll put those in now. The possible third ball, which would go here, is not needed because there is no second hole in the plate here. Set the plate like so. Turn the lower body over and set it like this. Install the two bolts finger tight. Take the modified valve body to the transmission. Align these holes with the studs and begin to lower it into place. Align this gap in the manual valve with the pivot pin on the selector lever and lower it into place. The last task of this lesson is replacing and tightening the fasteners for these assemblies and a stiffener plate which goes here. Here it is. These three bolts attach it. We'll tighten them with a torque wrench later. Get the 5 10mm headed nuts. Two of them go onto the accumulator body studs. Two go onto the studs for the valve body. The last one goes here, onto a stud for the solenoid pack. There are also 9 bolts with Torx bit heads which fasten the solenoid pack to the case. Here they are. Tighten them finger tight only for the moment. Now let's get the 7 long bolts which go through this section of the valve body. The bolts we need are 2 3/4 inch or 72 millimeters long. Finally, we need the 18 short bolts which go through the accumulator body and this area of the valve body. I'll use a socket and small ratchet to lightly snug the bolts with 8mm heads. including the ones for the stiffener plate. Lightly tighten the nuts. Use a T30 Torx bit socket on the solenoid pack bolts. Torque all of the bolts and nuts to 95 inch-pounds or 10 Newton meters. Make sure you tighten the bolts for the stiffener plate too. This completes the installation of the three main sections of the valve body area. In the next and last lesson, we'll finish up by installing the filter, pan, extension housing, and a few other external parts. I'll also explain how to properly install the torque converter. I'll see you later in lesson 16.